I didn't have much to start. I had a pen and a notepad and an idea of how my charts needed to go. I had, I knew how to, I looked up how to confidential chart notes and independent practice. There's a whole bunch of things I looked up, but I knew that I could just start by using the nursing skills that I'd already had and the psychotherapy education I'd already possessed to be able to start. So there wasn't anything stopping me other than my mindset.
Welcome to Nursing Beyond the Bedside. I'm Audrey, your host, and a nurse who pivoted my path several years ago. After 8 years as a critical care nurse, I was ready for change. I craved higher pay and more flexibility, but was struggling to find a clear path forward. Fast forward through positions in recruiting, customer success, and marketing, and many lessons learned along the way. Today, I run Pivot Path, a company dedicated to empowering nurses to redefine their careers. This podcast is designed to help you navigate the journey from clinical bedside nursing to a fulfilling career that aligns with your passions and goals. Here, you'll discover inspiring stories from nurses who've gone beyond the bedside, successfully transitioning to non-clinical roles, or redefining their nursing career. Join us as we hear their stories and share actionable strategies to help you make your own leap. Whether you're a new listener curious about what lies beyond the bedside, or a returning audience member in need of some fresh motivation, this podcast is your go-to resource for exploring new opportunities that can transform your career. Let's get started. Today, we welcome Sheena Howard, a trailblazer in the world of nurse entrepreneurship. With over 20 years of experience as a nurse in British Columbia and Ontario, Sheena broke the mold. After being told she couldn't start her own independent nurse psychotherapy practice, she said, "Just watch me," and is now the founder of Acceptance Nurse Psychotherapy, the only nurse-run psychotherapy clinic in Canada exclusively staffed by nurse psychotherapists. After building a multiple six-figure business, Sheena launched Biz Nurse Savvy to help other nurses grow their own successful ventures. In this episode, we'll dive into Sheena's inspiring journey, her insights on why nurses believe they can't pivot into business, and we'll flip the script as she shares that actually everything she knows about entrepreneurship was learned through nursing. Welcome to the show, Sheena.
Hi, Audrey. Thank you so much for having me on. I was really excited to talk with you today.
Absolutely. You have a really great story for us to share, really inspirational in a lot of ways. So we have a lot to cover, but why don't we start with just kind of your background as a nurse and your experience as a psychiatric nurse?
Sure. So let's see. I graduated in 2002 from Queen's University in Kingston. And then I went immediately out to Haida Gwaii, British Columbia, which is a small set of islands. It's a remote set of islands near Alaska. So still in Canada, but close to Alaska, where I lived and worked and played in the Indigenous community there called Masset and Old Masset. And I was there for 6 years. And there I got a chance to, it was my first nursing job. So I got a chance to cut my teeth on primary care and public health, where I did a full scope nursing, or what they would consider at that time advanced practice nursing. And that was wonderful. And also in each and every interaction that I had, there was some component of mental health. So that I was far away from my family, and my wife and I had our first child, and, kids change life. Apparently, like who knew? People tell you, but they never tell you how much it does. So we moved back to Ontario. And after I had our second child, I went back to work and worked as a full scope primary care nurse, where I incorporated a lot of mental health practice and took extra courses and started to consider a shift in my nursing path, and went and became a mental health nurse clinician at a small private school here in Ontario. And that led me to thinking, I think I could probably do this independently. And unfortunately didn't have the same kind of support in that particular role to do that kind of thing. After COVID, my job description changed, and they wanted me to do evenings, weekends, overnights, all kinds of things that I hadn't done for 20 years. and didn't want to go back to. So I decided that I would launch my own independent nurse psychotherapy practice. And that's how things shifted for me. So it feels like it's been quite a beautiful adventure. Lots of different exciting opportunities.
Absolutely. Did you know going into nursing to begin with that mental health and psychotherapy would end up being your focus?
Oh, what a great question. So yes and no. I was raised, oh my goodness. I was taught that nurses, they were training us to work in the hospital and they were training us to be leaders inside of the hospital. So that didn't really work for me. I didn't like hospital nursing, and I really stuck close to any space where I didn't have to do floor nursing. So I did work in the psychiatric unit, public health, the community health. All of that really resonated with me, and even labor and delivery. That is in the hospital, but you had patients one-to-one, and at the end you had two. Generally, it was a positive outcome, and I really liked that one-to-one. I knew that relational nursing was really important to me. And I knew that's how I was successful in my practice, was through relationships. And so I decided, or didn't really think about mental health being a part of it until I took my first nursing job. And then I realized that so much of what I was doing was mental health related. But even then, even back in 2002, we weren't really talking about mental health as a part of our nursing roles and every aspect of what we do.
Right. And I think it's interesting that you were always kind of drawn to the relationships that you could build with your patient. Because I know we're going to transition here in a minute to talking more about starting your own nurse psychotherapy practice. But I'm kind of curious, what was it in your practice leading up to that? Did you feel like there was something that you wanted to do that you weren't able to do, or something about the environments that you had been working in that wasn't totally fulfilling, that kind of pushed you in that direction of forming your own practice?
Yeah. Nurses, I'm not too sure what it's like in the States, but I imagine it's kind of the same in that nurses aren't necessarily encouraged to be creative or to do things that are beyond what their limited scope is in their job descriptions. When I worked out west, the wonderful part about living and working in a northern community is you're it. And if you don't do it, whatever is required, we're going to have to send you off island on a very expensive plane ride, and you're going to be away from your family. And so I really learned how to get creative with the resources we had, but also how to do things. How do I want to put this? To not ask for forgiveness, not permission. And then it became part of the role. When I moved back to Ontario, there wasn't a role here for advanced practice nurses. You had to be a nurse practitioner. And that was a lot of extra education. And I found that nurses in primary care were really squished into a particular mold. And that squish felt really uncomfortable, and it felt really unfair to patients, truly, that there's so much of what primary care nurses can do is around seeing and meeting patients where they're at, and do more than just give needles. We have huge capacity for assessments and for being able to work with families and teens and all kinds of things, and do procedures as well in primary care. And so that trying to push back against being squished was part of what prompted me to think that I could actually do something that was outside that traditional nursing role that we're all encouraged to squish into. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And that resonates a lot with me, because I do think that from within the nursing profession, the paths that you're given as a nurse are fairly limited and do fit a specific mold. So I do understand kind of what you're saying about this is the track, stick to it.
Yes.
Don't veer too off course. But yeah, I do also think that it's great that you had that experience in a more rural community where you got to be more resourceful and creative and push the bounds a bit in order to, care for the patients.
Yes, I can. The bounds weren't out of scope. they were exactly what nurses are trained, what I was trained to do. It's that other people, sometimes it was other nurses working in different settings, and sometimes it was the general public, and sometimes it was the other healthcare providers I was working in that would say things like, well, I didn't know a nurse could do that. Are you sure that a nurse can do that here? And totally within scope. It's just nobody had put their hand up to say, I'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's helpful context, because after this, you went on to, you wanted to create this nurse psychotherapy practice.
That's right.
So tell us kind of about how you got rolling with that, and explain to us exactly what a nurse psychotherapy practice is.
Okay. So in Ontario, we have we are given the legislations by the Ontario government to be able to do the controlled act of psychotherapy. And our college regulates us if we have the knowledge, skill, and judgment to perform the controlled act of psychotherapy. So a nurse psychotherapist is a nurse who has extra training and skills in the art and science of psychotherapy that she or he or they have added into their practice. It's very different than health education, very different than counseling. It's applying specific modalities to a symptoms and a mental health illness in order to create a change in cognition or behavior. So that's like the technical term of it. Very few of us do that work in independent practice. It's becoming more and more recognized or seen, but still there's very few of us that do it in an independent practice setting. And when I was working as a mental health nurse clinician, I could see the potential for what we could do as a nurse. And in fact, while I was working in that role, the government came out with a very firm stance that yes, nurses can do this. And then also our college came out with a very firm line that yes, nurses are able to do this. And we're one of 6 colleges in Ontario that can do that. Across Canada, there's various roles for nurses who work in mental health. They're psychiatric nurses, or they're nursing counselors or nursing therapists. And in Canada, there's only a few provinces that regulate the term psychotherapy. So Ontario is a bit of a ahead in Canada and other areas or in this particular area when it comes to psychotherapy. So I realized that I was feeling really hemmed in the role that I was in, and was being told that I couldn't call myself a nurse psychotherapist despite the fact that that's what I was doing. And then was told by a variety of different nurses in different levels of leadership and even by my colleagues that this wasn't something that I could do. The college was going to take my license. I didn't have enough education. I needed a master's degree, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of which wasn't true, but nobody had pushed. There was a few trailblazers that had done that work, but we didn't really hear about them very much. And finally, there was a conversation that led me to, which was, there's absolutely no way you could ever do that. And I had just had enough. And it's like, never mind. Just watch me do it. And I love that. Yeah, I quit my job, and my wife was like, okay, now what are we going to do? And I started my practice in my bathtub. Very simply just made a little Canva print and said, now accepting new clients. And that's how it got started. It was a Sunday afternoon in November. Yeah.
The determination is inspiring. I love it. You know, you had this idea of what you wanted to do. People told you couldn't. It's, I think, important to know, like, you educated yourself that, like, actually I can do this. Like, there's no rules, laws, like anything stopping me from doing this. I just need to go and do it.
Yes.
So
my career's been really marked with that. That questioning of, which is what we're taught in nursing school. We're taught to be skeptical and to question and to think critically. And so when people were saying, you can't go into public health or primary care, that's not what we trained you for. Why would you want to do that? You're going to lose all your skills. And I was, is that actually true? Is that really true? Which, interestingly enough, is a cognitive behavioral therapy question. So I feel like I've been challenging that status quo my entire nursing career, from my education to now. but it is, you're right, that educating yourself about what you're able to do and what your college says you can do is really important. Yeah, I love that point. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so tell me about what happened from there. You put it out there that you're accepting new clients. How did you start getting your first clients, and what were the next building blocks after that?
Right. So I put that ad out on Facebook, and every single person that liked it or commented on it, I went back and I messaged them privately, because these were all family and friends. And I said, would you mind sharing my post with an endorsement? Like what you think about me? You know, it's just, you know, I've worked with Sheena. She's a great nurse, or this is my sister. She's awesome. Like anything like that, just to kind of get my name out there. And within 4 months, I was filled. I was seeing 25 to 30 people a week. And it was wonderful. I felt so blessed. And it was right at a good time, not a positive time, but it was at a time when many people needed mental health supports, like through COVID. This was in 2020 when I started. And from there, I want to say I didn't have much to start. I had a pen and a notepad and an idea of how my charts needed to go. I looked up how to keep confidential chart notes in independent practice. There's a whole bunch of things I looked up, but I knew that I could just start by using the nursing skills that I already had and the psychotherapy education I'd already possessed to be able to start. So there wasn't anything stopping me other than my mindset. Then I started to have to turn people away. And I don't think there's a nurse in practice today that would say that doesn't hurt their hearts when we have to turn people away. And that was starting to get to me because my policy had always been whoever comes through the door, I'll see. In my practice as a public health nurse at West and my primary care role here in Ontario, if you showed up, I would see you, even if you didn't necessarily have an appointment. And so I started to think maybe it would be good if I could get another nurse to work alongside me and we could see people together. And that's how acceptance, the bones of acceptance got started. I brought on my first associate. He was working as a street nurse here in Peterborough and as a community nurse. And I was getting lots of requests for help with substance use. And that's one of his specialties. And so we were at a rugby game between our children. Our youngest children were on the same team. And he said like, hey, how are you? And I said, great. And we were talking and he was talking about burnout and how he was sick of what was going on. And I said, why don't you come work with me? And that's how it got started. Yeah.
That's incredible. And I think that it's important to call out too that you took this idea and you set it into action, because I feel like nurses, and this is actually probably true of anyone, generally speaking, who's ever had an idea that could be a business. Right. That step from from idea to setting it in action is really hard. There may or may not be some more or less steps that need to be done between idea and setting it into action. But one way or the other, the idea to execution is hard to overcome, especially if you've never done that before. It can feel very intimidating. You're stepping into the unknown. Can you describe any barriers, whether they were psychological barriers or true real barriers that you had to overcome as you were setting your plan into action?
Yeah, oh gosh, what a great question. Well, I'll start with the psychological barriers. I think in nursing, we get taught a particular way of being. We get institutionalized, if you will, where we're encouraged to only see what it is we need to do in our job. And it's just reinforced and reinforced. This is what your job is. This is what your schedule is. This is when you're supposed to show up. This is how you do this. Don't expect any more money than this, et cetera, et cetera. And so over years of that, and institutions, even if you switch up institutions, it's very much like that. And I had to really be okay with letting go of the golden handcuffs, which is also what keeps us staying in these traditional jobs, benefits, pension, built-in colleagues, all of those things, right, that go along with staying in that role. And being told time and again that as a nurse, like, there's certain things you just can't do. And also, if there's no mentorship or role modeling, you can't really see a path forward. So from a psychological perspective, I needed to surround myself with people who were saying, why not? Of course you can. And let's figure out how to make this happen for you. And that was really important. Those people were hugely important to me. The crappy part is that I had to look outside of my profession to get that kind of inspiration.
Right.
So when you're looking at people like Simon Sinek, who talks all about leadership, and you're looking at these gurus who have these businesses and they're just not coming from a nursing focus, that made it really difficult to even see that I could do it. Also from a physical standpoint, I had quit my job and didn't have a lot of money. It was COVID. And so I had to look at what was the bare bones of what I needed to do. And did I have that? And it was a constant questioning. Do I have a capacity to have a charting system that's confidential? Yes. Do I have all the colleges, all the nursing colleges guidelines? Have I read those inside out? Yes. All of the things that I had to do, those were all readily available. I think the biggest piece that we all want to know is, how did you get over all of that? Right? How did you move? How did that happen? And it is a constant questioning of, is that really true? Is it really true that I can't do this? Is it really true that I don't have enough money? Is it really true that I don't know what I'm doing? And it's just that, and surrounding yourself with people that are going to give you the truth, but also be really encouraging. That's how I got through it. And also learning what your risk tolerance is. Do you have a high risk tolerance? I have a really high risk tolerance. Not everybody does. And it's starting with where you're at. You don't have to start with what your big vision is. You're just starting with I just want one client. And once I get one client, you know what you can do. And it just cycles and it spirals from there. If you have a lower risk tolerance, then you might want to start in a really different place. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I really like everything you just said. There's a lot of really important takeaways there, because, what really stood out to me is that you had to seek outside of the nursing profession in order to really get the resources, encouragement, advice, guidance that you needed to kind of break out and be an entrepreneur, do your own thing. And I think that is so true. And something that I've found just through the different interviews that I have on this podcast is many nurses who have kind of taken a non-traditional path and done something different feel somewhat siloed as a nurse doing whatever it is that they're doing, and often feel like there's not a great communication channel back to the rest of the nursing profession about how they did what they're doing now, and the path to get there, and the encouragement that other nurses can do this too. And so I'm very excited that, maybe Pivot Path can be that for a lot of nurses, to be that channel of, listen, there's all of these nurses out here who are doing non-traditional things with their career and are finding fulfillment, better work-life balance, and really stepping into their value as not only as a nurse, but as a professional as well, or entrepreneur, or whatever it is. So I do think that what you're saying about finding a tribe that you can surround yourself with that will make you believe it's possible, removing yourself from where you were with all of the people saying you can't do that, or are you crazy, or whatever it is. You have to remove yourself from that, because while you can have your own inner talk that you can do this and the perseverance and that like constant questioning, you have to be able to have some endurance to pivot and step into something new, especially if that something new is building your own business. And so in order to keep you going through that process, having those around you who you can lean on and who can continue to give you like support and encouragement, I think is just so key. So whether that is like the Pivot Path community or just the voices you hear on this podcast or another mentor that you find who's out there doing something that you want to go and do, I think that having, even if it's just one voice in your life that's saying like, yes, you can do this, I think is just so, so valuable in that process.
I totally agree with you. And it's such a gift to have a podcast like this. I wish this had existed when I was in nursing school and our teachers could have given this as a homework assignment or, to listen and say, what is it that you've learned from these collection of nurses that are working outside of a traditional role? What an inspiration.
I hope that we start to see this shift within the profession, that nurses are valuable at the bedside and away from it. And the value of the skills that we develop through our nursing career. Because I think you experienced this as well, because you said that actually all that you know about entrepreneurship and like doing what you're doing, you actually learned and had these like baseline skills from your nursing career.
That's right.
So share with us some of those things that you feel like you developed as a nurse that were really fundamental in driving you forward down this new path.
And it's okay. I'd love to do that because it's really true. And in my humble opinion, I really do think that every major company needs to have nurses on their staff, needs to have nurses working in spaces where they want to increase their capacity to have relationships with any of their clients. Nurses are just so incredible at that, have huge capacity in that way. So for me, one of the very first things I learned in nursing school was how to be a critical thinker, right? How to not necessarily take everything we were getting as at face value. They taught us about how to dissect research, and they taught us about nursing theory, and they taught us about how to look at the medications that we're giving a client and why we're giving them to patients. There's all kinds of places where we had to question why. And from the very beginning of my entrepreneurship journey, that question of how come or why was such a valuable tool. So that critical thinking skills that were instilled in us. And then also in my experience in nursing, there was a real emphasis on problem solving. So with critical thinking goes problem solving. And you need that in business. You need that as an entrepreneur. You need that in any of your nursing skills. I can't think of one nurse I don't know that isn't a good problem solver, that can't MacGyver something out of nothing, right? What appears to be nothing. And when I started looking at it like that in my problem solving skills, and I started thinking, what would I do if I was in the health unit, or what would I have done when I was in primary care? Well, I would have figured out where my resources are. I would have figured out how to get the questions, how to ask the questions, and I would have educated myself on a particular person's diagnoses. So how do I want to attract clients? That was as simple as going back to my public health roots and looking at how do you create a public health campaign? It was as simple as that. We're taught that in our public health 101 in school. And then when you work in that, it was amazing to me. And all these light bulbs started going off. And then there was this idea that I started looking at how we're adaptable and resilient. So many of us, we know how to be chameleons in our jobs because we're working with how many different patients and family members. We can be adaptable and flow through different situations. And the resilience that's required to go back into a nursing role every day is one of the biggest gifts that we can give ourselves in the entrepreneurship journey, is this taking one of my nursing colleagues said, the hits just keep coming and we just keep rolling. It's like, yes, 100%, but how to be stronger after a particular experience. So I think I'll leave it there, but is that kind of what you were thinking? Or
yes, yes. And what I run into again and again when I speak with nurses, and this is actually something that I experienced myself through my own career pivot as well, is all of these skills that are so transferable, so applicable, and so important in really any type of role. These are skills that we kind of take for granted as nurses. They are just the underlying things that allow us to function in our role on a day-to-day basis. And in nursing, in the healthcare environment, more of the emphasis and the value of a nurse is placed on what type of patient pathophysiologies are you familiar with? What skills can you perform? What equipment can you use? What acuity of care can you provide? So all of these like hard skills get all of the attention when we're working clinically.
Yes.
And it is very easy to overlook in our day-to-day work that we have phenomenal interpersonal skills and we're able to walk into a room, de-escalate a situation, immediately gain the trust of the other person in the room and like build that relationship, which is so important. And like you said, every business should have a nurse involved for their building their relationship, because as nurses, we do that 20 times a day, depending on what unit we're in. And what we don't fully realize is that outside of the healthcare setting, like a lot of business people are not using those types of soft skills at the frequency and degree at which a nurse is using them. So when a nurse comes to some other role, like business, entrepreneurship, whatever it is, we're bringing these soft skills that we've developed to generally a much higher degree than the general population, just because of the environment that we've worked in. But it's really hard. This is what I think is difficult for nurses who are still at the bedside. If you've only ever worked clinically, if you've only ever worked in that setting, I think that it's hard to put your finger on what those things are and how they apply in a different context. So I think that like as nurses listen to this podcast, hopefully, you can a light bulb can kind of start to go off every time you hear a guest talk about like problem solving, being resourceful, communication, relationships, your ability to learn quickly, like all of these things that serve everyone so well, like no matter what they've done since bedside, like these are the things that are just so crucial. And the majority of nurses are very good at all of these soft skills.
Yes. And as you were talking, one of the things that I was thinking about, you were talking about like the relationship building and everything, is also our innate, well, I don't know if it's innate, but what we're encouraged to have is pattern recognition. So in these like Fortune 500 companies or in smaller businesses or medium-sized companies, when you need somebody to look at what are the patterns of what's happening here, there isn't anybody I know that's better than a nurse to be able to say, well, that actually looks an awful lot like this, and this, right? And here's why I see it. And here's what I know what's coming. We're also really incredible with our projections about what we think might be happening or could happen in the future. So that risk management for companies, I think, is a real missed opportunity if they're not looking at what we're able to do to manage risk and what we're able to do for pattern recognition. That really is a unique set of skills that, I mean, I would probably say physicians are up there as well with their capacities for pattern recognition. But I really agree with you. who is telling us that these skills we can translate into other areas and still be nursing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Technically, quote unquote, and it's still a nursing role.
Absolutely. And you can still make an impact. You can still, you can still positively impact other people's lives, patients' lives. You can still, nurses are passionate, like we want to make that positive impact. Mm-hmm. And I think that, realizing that we have these like really incredible skills helps us to understand that like we can make an impact, and we can make an impact often in a way that is like much bigger than the one-on-one impact that we're making with our patients every day. And like, don't get me wrong, like nothing replaces that. And you get to do this like because you're still working with patients and building that relationship. Mm-hmm. But I think that, if I look back on my career, the one thing that I really do miss about bedside nursing is actually being that like person who is really changing the experience of the day for that patient, that family, whatever it is. But I think that it's important to call out that that's one way to make an impact, but there are lots of other ways to make a difference. And it's those skills that we develop at the bedside that empower us to do that in lots of different ways. Yes. So I'm glad that we took the few minutes to kind of really, really call out some of those things that can help propel nurses forward down any path they choose.
Yes, I agree with you 100%.
And I know that you also, you saw a lot of success with your own business. So you have now launched Business Savvy. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing through that endeavor.
Oh, sure. So after I grew Acceptance into this place where there's a number of associates and we're seeing lots of clients, and it's become a successful business venture for me. I got lots of questions from nurses. How did you start your own practice? How did you build your own business? How did you know to do this? How did you know to do that? And I realized I was getting a lot of the same questions, and some of these nurses had already launched their business, but they wanted support and some knowledge around technical knowledge around how do I get more clients or how do I sell more products? And Business Savvy was the brainchild of that. It developed out of answering those questions for other nurses and looking at what are the milestones of a nursing business. You've already done the hard work of launching, but now you want to grow. And what are the educational pieces that we might be missing, the technical educational pieces? When I look at marketing, nurturing clients, sales, all of that stuff, if we just go back even to scratch the surface of our nursing training, I can point to countless places where we've learned how to do that. But the technical stuff, like how to run a successful marketing campaign, those are pieces that nurses just need a little extra bump up in. And so the Grow program was developed through Business Savvy to support nurses in a year-long journey of growing their nursing business, any business. Because of where I started, I have a lot of nurse psychotherapists in this first cohort, but it's open to all nurses doing any kind of business. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I can very much connect with that because Pivot Path was also just born out of my own story and getting the questions and, realizing that I had some answers and could provide some guidance, for you. I think that it's, incredible that you're once somebody has taken that step to create their own path, launch their own business, I think that it's so incredible to be able to come in and then provide them with this extra support and resources and knowledge that they need to really get it off the ground and get it moving. And that's obviously something that you've been very successful with yourself. So, I think again, this is the nurse desire to give back and
yes,
and continue to help others. And in this case, it's others who are, just a few steps behind you on a very similar path. So I think that's incredible.
And if my growth would have looked really different if I'd had a nurse business mentor when I started. I wouldn't have been so scared. I would have had a community. That the thing I love about the GROW program is that there's a community of nurses walking those same steps. And so much of what people are experiencing is similar. And just to know that somebody else has had it as a nurse, as it feels just, it's the relief I can't really describe to you. You have to experience it. I'm sure you have. When another nurse says, oh yeah, that happened to me, right? You think, oh, thank goodness I'm not alone. And it's the same in nursing entrepreneurship or nursing business. One of the things I was wondering, I actually wanted to ask you a question, Audrey, if that's okay. Is that allowed?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
It might be different in the States than in Canada, but some of the pushback I've gotten from nurses that have asked for my help is that I charge for my time. And I'm curious about what your experience has been like in that area.
Yeah. So a couple of things here, because as you were talking, I was relating a lot because what I do with Pivot Path is similar to what you're doing. The only difference is that I'm connecting with the nurse earlier on in their journey when they are first starting to have those thoughts of like feeling kind of stuck in my career. Like, what else is there? What else can I do? That's where I like to come in, and I get so much fulfillment by walking that nurse through all of the possibilities out there, watching their eyes just kind of like light up with this renewed sense of like excitement about their career and like the possibilities for growth and, all of these things. And, I think that some of what you're talking about as far as, charging for our time is something unique to the nursing profession, perhaps. And the way that I kind of think about it, because I've gotten similar feedback as well, of like, oh, well, why are you charging for this? Or this is a scam, or like whatever. And it's like, I'm pouring a lot of time and energy into like the coaching and resources and community and everything that I offer. So from a business perspective, of course it makes sense that you and I charge for our time and what we're offering.
Yes.
I think that with nurses, we are so used to being kind of like shut down on the salary growth part of being a nurse, though so many nurses are so passionate about what they do that it kind of becomes this mindset of, well, I'm really passionate about what I do. I get a lot of fulfillment from it. And so therefore I don't need to be expecting monetary gains or from what I'm doing. And I think that some of that mentality, which I think is detrimental on both ends, to be honest, whether you're a nurse at the bedside and, like there's only so much we can do about, the pay that we receive when we're working within an institution. But I don't necessarily think that like acceptance and being quiet about it is the resolution either. But I do think that, it's created this culture of thinking, well, if you're really passionate about it and you're getting fulfillment from it, then it should just kind of be like a project instead of a business.
Yes.
And so I wonder, I'd be curious to know if like how that resonates with you, or if you have anything to like add to or, subtract from that thought. But I've reflected on that quite a bit. And I think that that might be where it stems from.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. And we're in these roles where if we're working in a traditional nursing job and we have expertise in a particular area, we're being paid to share it. That's an expectation of our job. The number of times a nurse has reached out to me and say, can I have a coffee chat? Which is lovely. I would love to be able to do that. But imagine if you didn't get paid for that 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and it's never just 15 minutes because it's always an hour. You might think twice before you offered your time in that way. And the pushback I've received is similar, right? So why would I pay you when I can just get that information off the internet? Like, well, you're right. Why would you? Right? If you can get it off the internet, that's great. Or if you feel like somebody else could do it cheaper, or less expensive, that's great. But what we're offering is something that's really unique to nursing, and that it does make nurses really uncomfortable, I think, to talk about money. We're used to seeing a grid. Like, this is as far as you can go, and everybody knows that.
Yes.
Right? For those of us that are saying, well, that's actually, after 20 plus years, plus all of my experience in when you're working for yourself privately, it changes the game. And the amount of times I've really wanted to ask another nurse, like, how much do you want to invest in your life, in your business? That an hour with me is going to put you on a path where your business is going to grow exponentially. How much would you pay for that? Right? It's very difficult for nurses to answer that question. And, so I think my little, what do they call those? PSAs, public service announcements, is that if you're asking a nurse who's in business for their time, it's okay for them to expect financial compensation for their time, but also it's okay for you to know it's an investment in yourself and your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that investment in yourself is the flip side of that coin to really call out nurses. I think, as opposed to what I've seen in the business world, I think that a lot of nurses rely solely on their employer for any additional certifications, courses, whatever it is. They rely heavily on their employer to pay for those and kind of like require those. Like, if an employer is saying, in order to climb this ladder within our institution and like raise your salary, then you need to go and get like your CCRN, and like we'll support you in doing that, but like that's a requirement for you to get to this next thing. And I think that that's important to call out, because when you are breaking out of that institution in order to like go and do something like all on your own and something different for yourself, there are things that you're going to have to do to level yourself up. And that is something that like nurses need to realize is different. Like, if you're doing this for yourself, you're breaking out to like try to, whether it's you want more work-life balance or you want to make more money yourself, like whatever your reasoning is, you're going to need to make investments along the way to do that. And like those investments can be a coach like myself or you. It can be the tools or equipment or software that you need in order to like build your business and like get things moving. It's going to cost time and money.
Yes.
And time is money.
Yes.
And so I think that, just calling out that like investing in yourself and actually even just like realizing that like you are worth an investment in yourself is important. Like, you are worth the money that it takes to set yourself down a new track. Like, if that is what's going to make you happy and what's going to allow you to optimize your life for what is most important to you, then like that's all for you, and that investment is worth it. And so I think that it's also like flipping the script a little bit and saying like the value is really like all for yourself, and like you need to recognize your own value and potential and like what you can do from here.
Yes.
So I think all of those are just kind of like building blocks down the same path, and it really just comes to the confidence to, seek out the opportunities in order to like empower yourself in your own career.
Yes. And I've had an experience where a nurse had come and said, I would really like your mentorship. And then I talked to her, told her about how much it was going to cost. She's like, forget it. Not paying that amount of money. I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm not here to put you in the red. I'm here to support your goals. And this is how I can help you. And 18 months later, she came back and said, I get what I needed to do. And in 6 months, she had launched her business, scaled it, and grown it to the point where she was completely full in 6 months. And it was just through the push that she needed. And she paid for my time like within the first 2 months. Her investment was already paid off. And she came back and she said, I should have just done it then. right? So,
Yep.
yeah. There are those stories too.
Absolutely. Well, so I think that we've covered so much in this conversation already as far as, like what nurses can do, how you took the steps that got you to where you are, and, the fundamentals from your nursing career that really like fueled that. Before we go, is there any final advice or, words of wisdom that you might want to share with a nurse who's listening today who might feel a little bit stuck where they are, or thinking that they want something more or see an opportunity, but aren't quite sure how to get there? What would you share with them?
Well, my first suggestion would be to sit down and write out what your longing is. Is your longing to get away from the bedside? Is your longing to have more work-life balance? Is your longing to make more money? What is the longing? And you might even want to think about just getting a small, tiny book. It doesn't have to be a large journal. That's really intimidating, but just what is the longing? Is it, I don't want to cry every day going into work? That's okay. And then this is one of the exercises that I really encourage nurses to do, is to write down all of your education and all of your experience and all of your roles in that experience. And maybe you already know what kind of job you want, or maybe you already know what kind of role that you want to pivot into, or you want to work with somebody like yourself, Audrey, who can help you discover that. That's really important, is finding somebody that can help you walk through that process. So I've got all of these lists of all of the skills, the things I can bring. Audrey, what can I do? And then
absolutely.
Yeah. And then that, because we're socialized as nurses to work in community and as a team. So it doesn't make any sense for us to then get isolated and siloed and have no team. So sometimes you got to go looking for that. And once you figure that out, if in your mind you're saying, well, I really see a need, the gap in care and service is this, and I can fill that with this experience, and you want to move into your own way, your own business, then it's to find somebody that can encourage you and find a program that you can join where other nurses are on the same path. I'm not just saying that because of the programs you and I run, but I'm also saying it because back when I first started, if I had had this, it would have made such a huge difference in my self-esteem, getting over my imposter syndrome faster. And that my invitation would be for any nurse to go into therapy. Because that is really going to help clear out some of the limiting beliefs and some of the historical or legacy burdens we're holding on to. So I know that's a bit scattered in terms of the advice, but essentially we're looking at finding out your why, finding out why you want to do this, and then finding your community of people that are going to help you get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, we've said it a couple of times throughout this call, but I do think that the value of finding other nurses who are, even if they're just a few steps ahead of you down the path that you're interested in, our nursing background is very unique. So someone outside of nursing who is where we want to get to, their path from wherever they came from to what they're doing now is going to be very different from someone who is coming from nursing into whatever else it is.
Yes.
And so I think that, that is the true value of having another nurse who's a few steps ahead of you to help guide you, is there's inevitably going to be some commonalities in the experience, whether that is like psychological barriers to overcome or the skills and knowledge that you're lacking and those gaps that need to be filled and where to, find resources to do that. So yeah, I think that nurses need to support nurses, and you need to find the nurses,
that's right,
who are out there doing that. And there's me, there's you, but there's also so many out there. And
that's right.
Just having conversations, connecting on LinkedIn, things like that it's a great way to get started.
It's true. And if you're a nurse who's thinking that you don't know how to do that, I would encourage you to go back and look at what would you do for a patient? How would you advocate for a patient. Patient advocacy, I'm sure it's the same in the States, but here in Ontario, patient advocacy is a huge part of what we already do. Imagine what we could do if we applied those patient advocacy skills to our own experience and journey in wanting to pivot from one role to another or into your own entrepreneurship journey.
To learn more about Sheena's psychotherapy practice, you can find her at acceptanceclinic.ca. To learn more about her Business Savvy business, you can find her at businesssavvy.com or email her directly at hello@businesssavvy.com. You can also connect on LinkedIn or follow her on Instagram at businesssavvy or acceptance.clinic. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep up with our latest episodes. And if you were inspired by today's conversation, I hope you'll share this episode with someone who'd love it just as much as you did. If you're ready to pivot your path, sign up for my free newsletter at mypivotpath.com. Get non-bedside jobs delivered to your inbox every week. And if you have questions or just want to say hi, feel free to email me at audrey@mypivotpath.com. Thanks for listening, and until next time.